Mark Phillips, photographer, welcome to Chesterfield. Thank you for coming. Tell us how you started on this journey with repair cafes and so forth.
Right, well the project actually has been running for somewhere between 5 and 6 years now. And it started, like most projects in photography do, with a bit of serendipity. I had actually gone out to an academic conference and I was in Cuba. And I do photography, and lots of photographers love doing photography in Cuba, but I didn't want to do what any other photographer did, so I went looking for something different. And I was intrigued by the amount of repair that was going on, and I shot lots of other things as well, but I thought, actually, this is really interesting. This is one of the first, or one of the few places I've been recently where they really still have a culture of repair. And this is in the era when Obama was the US president. So America was making overtures to Cuba. There was already the first signs of Cuba opening up. Lots of US tourists were appearing. The very first branded shop had opened in Cuba with a US brand in it. And I thought, this is a culture that's going to disappear. I'm going to record it. I'm going to document it before it goes. So I went back about 4 or 5 times. I worked with a local photographer, Lizzie, who was also a lecturer at the Arts University in Havana. And we went around and documented and photographed the repair culture in Cuba. That was going to be the project. Of course, Trump came along and undid everything that Obama did, and I suddenly realized actually the repair culture wasn't going to disappear that quickly. Because Trump effectively set Cuba back several years overnight when he got into office. But I got talking to some people over there, and I think I ran into a British couple in a bar, and they said, oh, there's this place down the road from where we live that does something like this. You should go and have a look. So I went to a place called Loughborough Junction, which is in South London, and it's a remakery, but they were hosting something called a restart party. And this is run by a group called the Restart Project. So the Restart Project is very similar to repair cafes. In fact, they work a lot together, but the Restart Project focuses particularly on e-waste, as it's called, electronic and electrical waste. And although I've photographed lots of repair, everything that you can think of being repaired, this particular project, if you look around, you'll see that it's predominantly focused on e-waste. It's on electronic or electrical waste. And the reason why I'm focused on this particularly is, one, it's our fastest growing waste stream, yet most people are completely oblivious to it. The second is that most electronics and electrical goods are not very repairable. So globally, we only repair 17.4% of all of the electronic and electrical waste that's created. Even in Europe, which is one of the best performers, they're only barely at about 40%. So it's a very fast growing waste, and we're not very good at recycling it. So what do we do? Well, there actually really is only one thing we can do, which is to repair. And so this whole project is all about, well, if we're going to repair, how and where, what can we do? It's really, at the end of the day, it does a little bit looking at the problem. So as you look, for those in the audience here now, if you look over to my right, there's 5 posters up. Those 5 posters are essentially saying, this is the problem that we've got. And actually, to compound matters, what people don't realize is not only are electronics difficult to repair, but if you take something as simple as the little mobile phone, and this is actually a relatively old mobile phone, so it's actually better than some of the newer ones. This weighs about 160 grams. To make this mobile phone, you will need to dig up around 30 to 35 kilos of the planet to get the materials to make that little tiny phone. But that's just digging the stuff up. In order to be able to use it to physically make a phone, you have to process those ores, those materials that you've dug up. And then when you process them, you have to convert them into components, and those components are assembled, and they eventually become the phone. In that entire process, we create about 85 kilos of waste that is toxic. And there's all sorts of things in there. There's heavy metals, there's arsenic, there's everything else. So these 5 posters are essentially saying, we've got a really big problem with our electronics and our electronic waste. They're our fastest growing waste. We can't recycle them very well, and the upstream consequences are massive. What do we do? And the answer is repair. And so the rest of this project has been, and in fact the project you see on the walls here, and also what I've been doing is to go around and look at solutions. So we know there's a solution in Cuba. It's a culture of repair. They'll repair everything and anything, and if they can't repair it, they'll strip it apart, they'll scavenge the bits that they know they can reuse in the future, and they'll shove them away in a cupboard for the next time that it needs to be, something like that needs to be repaired. We don't do that here very much. But that's not the only thing we can do. So I photographed Cuba and its culture, which is behind me. And of course, they had to do it out of necessity. They've had an embargo since, 61, when they had the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the US basically said, you're not allowed to have any more goods. So they've had to make do with whatever they've had. But you'll find actually really, really good examples of repair culture in most of the developing world, most of the global south. You'll find it in Ghana, you'll find it in India, you'll find it even in parts of China. Which is interesting because they're in many ways responsible for creating most of the stuff that we now throw away. But that's our problem. We're the consumers. Clearly, we can use commercial repairers if we can afford them. The problem with commercial repair is it's quite expensive. It's deliberately more expensive than it needs to be because manufacturers make it that way. And manufacturers make it that way because manufacturers don't really want you to repair your thing. They want you to buy another one. So some of those very well-known technology brands, whilst they say you can repair, they don't make it very easy for people to repair. They make it very difficult to get into the devices. They make it very expensive to get the components to repair your device. And in some instances, there are certain manufacturers who will then have effectively software or firmware in some of the components that mean even if you get a commercial repairer, so even an Apple-approved commercial repairer repairing an Apple phone won't necessarily be able to get the phone to work properly unless they've got access to Apple's database to make that component synchronize with your phone. So they make it quite difficult. They're not the only ones, so I'm not going to single them out. Some of their stuff is actually not that bad in terms of repairability. Samsung are worse, in my opinion, because they virtually glue everything together, which basically means it's very, very difficult to put the whole device back. So manufacturers are a problem, even for commercial repairers. So for the people, a lot of the people in this room who I've met over today, who are volunteer repairers in repair cafes, trying to repair something like that is pretty close to nigh on impossible. But it can be done. It's just a barrier. So I've looked at that. I've looked at, obviously, repair cafes, what the Restart Project do in the UK. I've also looked at similar activities overseas. I've also seen, and to be honest with you, I think these are some of the best models I've actually seen, the work that's done in Scandinavia. And there's this little block here that's Scandinavia. And there are two organizations I've been to in Scandinavia. One is called Retuna in Sweden, and the other one is called Kierrätyskeskus in Helsinki. Finnish language is almost completely unpronounceable, but what they do is amazing. So Finland happens to be the happiest country in the world by all of the metrics. It also happens to be the country that's best at repairing, so maybe if we all repaired, we'd all be happier. Anyway, what do? Well, in the 90s, the Helsinki government really realized that recycling per se wasn't actually doing the job, and they opened these centers called Kierrätyskeskus, which stands for Reuse Center. So they have commercial repairers, but if you've got something that actually it's broken, you can't afford or justify repairing it, but you think it could be repairable, then rather than dumping it into the household waste, you take it along to one of these Kierrätyskeskus. Or if it's a big fridge or a washing machine, you ring them up and they'll come and pick it up. And what they do is they'll attempt to repair it. If they can repair it, they'll sell it, and the money they make from selling it goes back into improving the environmental services in the city. So they're looking to continually improve. Now, they've been doing this for 30 years. They're way ahead of us. There's one council that I'm aware of in the UK that has just started to do it. So we're 30 years behind Finland. Other things that they do there, which I think are great, but they're not really part of this project, but I learn as I do this, is, so they do things like, you'll see there's a picture over here with a load of white motors. They will scavenge parts. So this is where they repair all the washing machines. And if they can't repair the washing machine, they'll strip out all the bits that are reusable, they'll store them, and then they'll use them to do a cheap repair for the future. And then that washing machine, even it's going to be sold, even though they've used it apart from, it will still go out with a warranty. So these things are going out with 3-month or 6-month warranties on occasions. Both Retuna, which is in Sweden, and Kirata also do something else. So they try to do more than just be a place where things are repaired. So in both of these centres, they actually also use them as places where people who have either come into the country as refugees or migrants, or they've maybe had problems in their life and they've come out of jail or off drugs or alcohol or whatever, they actually use these as a vehicle to help rehabilitate people. So they'll employ them. And during that employment process, they'll actually get trained in how to do repair. And if they have come from another country, they will also be taught Finnish and English. The whole point of this being that these not only help the community in terms of the environment, but they also help the community in terms of building community, because they end up with people who can do something valuable and make a contribution at the same time. So they're quite interesting places to go to. And both of these organisations were more than happy for me to wander around for days. And what I tend to do is some photographers will just drop in, take a snap, disappear. I tend to get to know and work with the people in the locations, because I end up, I think, with a better understanding of what really is going on there. So we've got, as I said, the solutions are, we don't have the culture anymore. I'd like to see us bring something close to a repair culture back. I think we're going to need it to achieve all the things we talk about in terms of the environment, sustainability, etc. We've got commercial repair and we've got our community repairers. The photos on the right are actually community repair groups from the Restart project and repair cafes. We could have city or waste authority led solutions. We don't really have them in the UK at the moment. They're a huge gap. And all those things work quite well in sort of cities and towns, but the other thing that I've also been starting to photograph more recently is what do you do in rural communities? And in fact, I was down in West Somerset a couple of months ago, and they've started now looking at how they can get their repair cafes to be mobile, because if they put it in one place, it's too far for people to come. So they're looking at how do they make their repair cafe mobile, and then how do they do things like let all the little villages know what's going on and give people an opportunity to drop things off that could be either gifted or repaired. And this van tours the rural communities in Somerset, and it advocates repair, and it also helps the local repair communities so that you can actually do repair in the rural communities as well. So I guess in essence what I've tried to do here is show we've got a problem. It's our fastest growing waste. Recycling isn't the solution. In fact, when people say we're going to recycling, I actually consider that to be greenwashing. They are bullshitting you by telling you that recycling is the solution, because recycling doesn't work for the vast majority of electronics. We have to do things like community repair, enable commercial repairers to be able to work much more cost effectively than they can at the moment. And the only way we'll do that is to have a right to repair movement that it forces manufacturers to let independent repairers repair. And then I would love to see all of our councils have something equivalent to what they have in Scandinavia, because that helps deal with the stuff that can't be commercially repaired or repaired by community groups like the Repair Cafe here. And so this project is predominantly, in terms of images, about solutions. It's things, and every one of these is a solution we could do today. So there's no excuse for not doing them. It's all about the will of our politicians and the others to make this happen. But there are people who can make it happen, which is all of us, by nagging them and nudging them and maybe asking the questions or voting in the people that are most likely to do it. And so with that, I think that's probably it.
Mark Phillips, photographer, thank you.
Thank you very much.